Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are ready for a massive Protoss versus Terran match. We've got ECalipso taking on Eud64 on Axiom. Let's see what happens. ECalipso, the guy who I'm actually familiar with here in the top right, and Eud64 making his cast-over debut, the Terran player in the bottom left. I have never seen him play. I have no idea what is in store for me, but I'm excited. I was told that this replay was really good. It looked like a bit of a chonker as far as file size go, but that has deceived me in the past, so who knows? And we'll have to wait and see what ends up happening. But if you are new around here, if you've never seen what we're talking about here before, this is Cosmonarchy. This is not your average Starcraft. This is not your average SCR, Starcraft Remastered or whatever. This is the older version of the game and then built back up into something completely different. We've got essentially a whole new game within the bones of Brood War. And we'll talk a little bit more about all of those differences in this video. But PvT, I mean, it's a classic matchup. It's one where all the Terrans say, dude, Protoss is overpowered. Just look at all the things they can do. And then the Protoss are like, dude, the siege tank is incredibly overpowered. I have to blow the Terran's army up with the siege tank because my units don't do anything. And on it goes back and forth. Let's just say that's a little bit different in Cosmonarchy. Although a lot of people are saying that Protoss is OP in Cosmonarchy, so maybe it's not really that different. Maybe we end up in the same place no matter what. Maybe StarCraft is just fated for that. One of the things you can see is we have the opening strategies being sort of slowly unfurling for our players is that, yes, you can harvest Vespene directly from the geyser. We have these reskinned geysers for the space platform tile set. We also have the Ridge as well, which is actually like you could say a... What would you call that? I guess it's like a mini node, a mini gas node, and it does give you less Vespene per return, but you still want to saturate it eventually. We will have a Fulcrum opener here for EUD, so going straight for mech, you don't need the... there's no tech requirements for all of Protoss, so they could theoretically open with their most expensive structure. It's just you'd die before then, so it's balanced through that. But you can tech rush as Protoss a lot easier than the other races because you don't have any tech requirements. However, for Terran, you don't have a tech requirement for the Fulcrum, so you don't need to make a Stockade, which is our name for the barracks. You don't need to go into Bio first and then do it. So if you believe that Bio is useless versus Protoss, which it actually isn't in Cosmonarchy, but it's a different playstyle, Vultures opening up give you very different strategies. You can go straight for the Fulcrum. Now on the side over here, we did hear the quarry being constructed. Add-ons have a little bit of a sound effect when they're being created. Got a couple of mine laying here. You can see the sound effects for that. The nice little thruster graphic for the Vulture. What else has changed? Well, we don't have damage types anymore. So when you see the Drakon, which actually turns, unlike the Dragoon, it will deal full damage to anything that has 0 armor, and it'll only be reduced by armor based on how much armor the enemy unit has. So the Vulture has no armor, therefore when the Drakon hits it, it will always be dealing 15 damage. Now there's a couple of caveats there because some buffs can give you armor in some of the units. I mean, there's 50 units per race on average, by the way, guys, so it's a completely different kind of game. You don't have upgrades or researches, you just straight up have all of the abilities. So you're seeing there's no like Dragoon range being researched, right? You just have 6 range, excuse me, on the Drakon from the word go, instead of having to wait for that +2 range from the upgrade. The Embassy is coming up. This is going to be a macro play for ECalipso. He's probably going to go for a single Witness, the new name for the Observer, and that will allow him to scout his opponent, and from there he'll use the Embassy to produce non-stop workers, because it's essentially a parallel worker production queue. That's what the quarry is here for EUD, who's still on only 1 production structure. He's going to change that now with a second Fulcrum, but he's already setting up his expansion and using all of these lobotomy mines, which are crucially not spider mines, to maybe put the pressure on ECalipso. And then, there were other games that these two played. This is just the one that was highlighted for me to cast. So I'm guessing what ended up happening, and maybe we don't get this tapestry sort of threaded in this kind of game because we don't actually know how these two have fought against each other. This is probably their like 15th or 16th game or something, fighting just each other. They've played Cosmonarchy for a bit longer than that and played against other opponents. Interestingly enough, we have a Cyclops that's probably for anti-air. We'll talk about that in a moment. Vulture's now withdrawing. So I guess the rhythm of the game seems to have been established, that maybe the Vultures run in and ECalipso does not even try to poke across the map versus that. And instead he's going to go ahead and hold his ramp here, his choke, if you will, while the mines have been laid. Now the mines don't blow up and deal damage. Instead they blow up and they stun units. Now if they get destroyed before they can detonate, they just slow them. So that's what we're going to see on the little move over here. That one indeed was not attack move, so you can see the stun demonstrated there. ECalipso knew this was going to get casted clearly, so he went ahead and did that for us, so we would have a nice little opportunity there. Now the Witness is out to clear those. You don't normally need to clear it with a witness, the way that you're kind of forced into it as Protoss versus the Spider Mine in StarCraft 1. We are actually going to have a Palladium add-on. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. The Quarry add-on over here. The Treasury is a faster town center that you can make it faster, rather. It's obviously a lot less durable. It has about half the HP of the Ministry here. As you can see, it's minus 800 HP on that and minus 1 armor. So it's a lot more easy to focus down. Meanwhile, if you think about the drawback to it, besides the fact that it's very vulnerable, it doesn't train workers directly. You need the Quarry add-on then. And that means you're not going to get access to the Lodestone add-on or the Anvil add-on. The Quarry is definitely the most popular add-on right now. We'll see if that changes as more meta develops. Obviously, we're pretty early on into the game's history right now, so we don't have like fully mapped out build orders for all of the things yet. We're still early days in that. So we got the Anchor. You can load mech units into the Anchor now. We will have the Phalanx out thanks to the Palladium add-on. Basically, you have 3 units that you can train from the Fulcrum by default, and then you can build 1 of 2 add-ons to give you 2 more units. So in total, the Fulcrum can make 7 units, but it's a maximum of 5 at any given time. The Witness is going to go ahead and spy on that. You might be wondering where are the Watchdogs, where are the missile turrets, right, to detect. Well, the missile turret does not detect anymore. It's called a Watchdog. All the Terran structures that you can build directly lift off, and all of the add-ons can be self-destructed to clear space if you need to later on in the game. They can also be, generally, as a general rule, they can be picked up by transports and moved around as well. It's a little finicky right now, so we're going to try to improve the usability of that feature a bit later on. We're going to get a fast third base out of ECalipso. He's behind in workers a little bit, but that's because he's making so many witnesses. Really wants to keep tabs on his opponent, not using that for general worker production. So if you're wondering, okay, well, if my missile turret doesn't detect, what does detect? We've removed scanner sweep from the game. There's no ComSat add-on. Instead, the lodestone is static detection, and it's also a garrison. It's sort of like an anchor that you can attach to the Treasury or Ministry. But you also get access to the Shaman or the Anseal. And we can see here a star pad is being started. So that is going to be the source of the Anseal. The Shaman is actually coming from the Stockade with a specialized healing add-on. We might see that later on in the game as well. Meanwhile, an Ardent Authority as well as 4 gateways is going to be the port of call for ECalipso. Going for heavy siege. The Architect is about to pop out of this structure. It's essentially this long-range sort of siege weapon. It does have 10 range, so it's outranged pretty heavily by a sieged Phalanx, which doesn't seem to... Okay, it looks like we might be heading out for a move out here. We've got a lot of Cyclops, we've got a lot of Vultures, got a fair number of Phalanxes as well. At the same time, of course, ECalipso is aware of this, so he's going to start scrambling his forces over to that third. He's not moving with the Architect, which might be a little bit of a mistake. We do have another one about halfway done. Couple more units moving on in. The Mason to scout will end up revealing the army. So at the very least, EUD is somewhat aware of things, but the witnesses have been really, really good for ECalipso. EUD might need to think about breaking out the Anseal a little bit sooner. He does have one just now started, so it'll be a moment before he can start clearing those. He's got a lot of Cyclops, not normally a unit we see versus Protoss, but with so many of them, it does feel like maybe you can clear things like Zealots and Dracodons and stuff a little bit clearer, a little bit faster, because what you're doing is using the crowd control that the Cyclops provides. However, they are pretty vulnerable. I mean, so too are Vultures. So it looks like he's going to try to entrench himself over here. The little valley here is going to give you +2 weapon range when you're on the cliff targeting units down there. So that's a really crucial thing. It's not normal cliff advantage. Instead, you get +2 weapon range. So there's no RNG in the game anymore for that. Now here comes the engagement. The Architect's going to go ahead and exchange a lot of missiles onto these armies, but the Phalanxes have been allowed to fire off a lot of shots. Now this extra Phalanx here wasn't actually in siege mode, and there's another one all the way in the back that's not actually deploying. But there we go, a nice couple of shots here. And ECalipso definitely on the back foot. Has to wait for a couple more of the Zealots to come out. The front line definitely needs to be there because it buys a little bit of time. Now we've got an Anseal here. Should probably move over here so he can snipe that Witness. I'm not sure. It looks like he'll automatically do that when he moves a little bit closer. Now we've got the Phalanx line sort of creeping forward. And yeah, crucially, we only saw a couple of Zealots come out. It was a little bit late there. I don't really see too much else going for ECalipso right now, so he's got to be very careful about this. He might end up sacking this third base, which he doesn't really want to do, because back at home, Terran adding another quarry, using the Treasury for tempo. We don't really see any other tech coming, but EUD does have a lot of minerals, so he's going to see if he can maybe throw down a bunch of stockades here to get rid of that mineral income. You can always mix in like Clerics and Hurricanes and similar type of units, even if you don't want to use the Mavericks. And if you're new to Cosmonarchy, don't worry about the names. You'll grasp them eventually. Think about it as if I'm telling you, and I know this sounds strange if you're coming from a Brood War-focused environment. Imagine me telling you that you should work in some medics and some Firebats into the army versus Protoss. And the reason is because the Firebat replacement, the Huracan, now rends armor on its attack. So it can be very powerful. It's a lot more durable as well. Doesn't have Stim Pack, so it's not really about DPS anymore. And yeah, indeed, this Nexus is going to get evacuated. And we just now saw Tier 2 started. So the Atlas, it uses the engineering bay graphic, is a completely different purpose now because we don't have upgrades, right? So instead, the Atlas provides you with that Tier 2. It's going to allow you to unlock another, say, 15 or 20 units or so that you can start to specialize into after the fact. And now we see coming back into the valley. Obviously, the Witnesses had spotted a little bit here, but yet again, he's going to be fighting uphill. ECalipso has to be a little bit scared about that. The Anseal will eventually be picked apart, so it won't be able to shield or detect anymore. We did see the, I hear the analog. I actually don't see it. Oh, look at this. It's hiding underneath there. So the analog fires shots back when it still has energy to do so. And that is a pretty big deal there. So it's actually going to get drawn in. Now, it only fires back the direct damage, so if you only hit it for a splash attack of like 3 damage, it's only going to fire back for half of that, so 1.5 damage, which is not ideal. But if you hit it with a direct hit from a phalanx, suddenly you're going to take like 60 damage right back. So it can be very, very powerful if you have a lot of those, and they do come out of the same structure as the Ardent Authority. So obviously I talked earlier about how like the Terrans can build at most 5 units, but 7 total from the Fulcrum. The same is true for the Stockade. The Starpad doesn't have any add-ons. It's kind of like an outpost. It can only make 3 units. Meanwhile, on the Protoss side, the Gateway has 5 units and the Ardent Authority has 5 units. You can make 5 out of both of them, and they're obviously completely distinct units. Those are the only 2 production structures we see so far as unit types go. But ECalipso is trying to secure 12 o'clock. He's obviously behind the 8 ball when it comes to the economy. And he was able to, isolate exactly where his opponent is. We do see a pretty lax amount of Anseals. In fact, a total dearth of them right now. Another one coming, but it's very, very late. And that's going to allow those Anseals the Witnesses to actually scale up into the game. We did not... Okay, I think he has, a little bit of vision on that Witness. He might decide to pick it. Meanwhile, of course, the engagement coming in. We do have some Mavericks to try to just spend down the mineral account that was kind of out of control for a little bit there. And they're softening up. They're drawing some targets and drawing some fire. Nice, meaty hit onto those Drakodons down there. Some attempted splitting there for ECalipso, but not quite far enough. The splash radius is pretty high, but he does end up wiping this force. Now, the question is, does he have enough left over after this point to be able to get much else going on? The Mavericks have been scattered across the map. They're going to frustrate attempts at taking additional expansions. Again, you have stim pack from the word go. You don't have to research it. You don't have any linear upgrades of like weapon damage and stuff. So that's something that actually allows you to maybe pivot into a couple of, Mavericks here and there and just like move them across the map and stim them to try to harass the worker lines, right? Unfortunately, a couple of units did seem to move forward here. The new Goliath graphic, as fancy as it is not going to be enough to stabilize versus all those Zealots. EUD kind of hemorrhaging a couple of his mech units out of the Fulcrum off of a bad rally that he's going to have to correct there. He might be able to claim this Legionnaire, and that's it. That's all he was able to do. So there you go. Now, the Anseal was just revealing the Witness, but it does end up moving a little bit further away. We did see some captaincies get at it, and crucially, we've got guild halls coming complete with the Autocrat, which is a very powerful infantry unit that basically rends armor on its attack. And also, if the unit dies during this armor rend, they are actually revived, but taken control of by the Terran player. It's sort of like the Terran version of mind control, but it requires you to actually kill the unit with a certain window. There's a couple other variants of that behavior that you can do. We also have 2 Palladiums added. I'm not crazy about the SimCity because I think the Phalanxes are actually going to get trapped here, but we'll see it. We'll keep an eye on that. Because, again, it's expensive to make these Palladiums, but you can self-destruct them if you need to, and obviously it would be worthwhile to do that if you're getting stuck. So we'll see. The buildings tend to be a little bit more permissive as far as their sizes are concerned. That Witness in the mineral line here getting a lot of value, definitely providing ECalipso with a nice little insight into what's going on. But this base has gone completely untouched and undetected, and therefore EUD definitely has the macro advantage, showing a very strong debut here. Definitely been a practiced player, you can tell. And there we go. Ends up dealing with that. If he had his Autocrats out, it would have been funny. He would have been able to steal that Witness back, but they slowly decay after they've been revived, so it wouldn't have been very useful. That being said, we do have a couple of rounds over here. You're going to see these Zealots start to revive and turn back against the enemy. The Analog does end up going the way of the Dodo almost immediately, and the Autocrats are really getting a lot of mileage dealt here. There's not great anti-crowd for ECalipso. He doesn't have any Cantors. He doesn't have really hardly anything else going on, right? That's a pretty big deal. And we even saw Azazels hit the field. They have defensive matrix instead of the science vessel, which is now called the Seraph. Seraph is much more of an offensive spellcaster, whereas the Azazel is more defensive. It's going to project this aura of conditional armor. As long as you're facing the attacker when it attacks you and you have this aura effect, you're actually going to be getting +2 armor. So it's pretty powerful at the end of the day. Meanwhile, coming over here, we do see the Ancestral Archives has been put down. That's what this graphic is for the Patriarch, so that's another Protoss unit. That's actually going to be very good at crowd control, but it requires you... It's like a sustain crowd control type option, where it does deal splash damage, but it has to be kind of close to the front line, which I'm not sure is ideal versus Phalanxes. But admittedly, the tank count is fairly low. EUD pivoting into Bio with some, nice mismatch of... or mishmash, I should say, of a couple of other units. Looks like his rally is a little bit frustrated by this Fulcrum positioning, but it can still get out. So again, the building sizes are a little bit more permissive so far. We've got Madcaps and then double Autocrat production. Definitely a critical unit that EUD is trying to make use of. We've got an Uptecton here. If we had 3 or 4 more Uptectons, I would definitely feel much more comfortable from ECalipso's POV. He's now going to see if he can go ahead and try to get a favorable engagement here. The front line being fodder, not ideal here. Just going to end up getting consumed by the Autocrats and then draw shots from the Architects and indeed from the Uptecton. There's no healing over here for this army, so every bit of hit... Well, I guess technically the Phalanx can the Azazel can dematrix stuff, and when the Azazel dematrixes a unit, it does get healed, in addition to being shielded. So there is that. There is a little bit of single target healing. Not exactly the most optimal for this sort of situation. We don't have any Shamans. Actually, in fact, we don't even have any Vestries. The Mavericks are just here to burn some minerals. Now another attack coming in here, another engagement, I should say. We obviously have the Architects and the Uptectons. The Patriarchs have now hit the deck. So the Patriarchs debuff units, and any unit getting hit by a Patriarch will then restore shields to any other Protoss unit that attacks it. So it basically turns your enemy's units into shield batteries. And that level of sustain stopped the Autocrats from being able to sort of semi-snowball the fight by stealing enemy units because they just didn't die as fast. And that was a sort of cascade of effects that allowed ECalipso to win that particular engagement. You can see how powerful the Patriarchs can be when they have the right kind of backing. Even still, obviously at this point, we're not going to get too far away with those kinds of units. And those little blue effects that show up at the end there are actually a speed boost to all Protoss units in the area. So if you attack a unit that was debuffed by the Patriarch and you kill it, its corpse will be consumed for the purpose of speeding up Protoss units, like allies of the Protoss player who owned the Patriarch. And the reason why that's significant is it could have allowed him to give chase, but he decides not to. Now we're going to close things out here by just taking a look at taking stock of the situation. Unfortunately for ECalipso, he's not going to be able to take a 4th base, and this one will be able to, you can see it, he gets stunned on the way, but he still manages to drop the Nexus. Mines do actually hit workers in Cosmonarchy. We got this guy who's unfortunately trapped, and he's trying very hard to get out, but he eventually convinces his allies to do so. And this base over here, all the way up at 10 o'clock, if you can believe it, has been running for a little bit of time now. So we're talking about a 3-base Protoss against a 5-base Terran. ECalipso is up against the wall when it comes to that sort of thing. He does not have the, he's got an adequate tech to respond to this. He's got a lot of gateway units, but it does feel like EUD should have the opportunity to fight back. He's got a really nice spread of Phalanxes, Autocrats. He's even got a couple of Olympians out, which deal great DPS, but the front line is crashing down and staying alive thanks to the Patriarchs. Finally, it will fall, and ECalipso tries to push on in, but now we've got some Hurricanes, and of course we've got some turned Zealots that are going to help soak up a lot of that damage. Meanwhile, there's a little bit of a raid happening at 10 o'clock that we'll check out in a moment, but it's really important that we see the fate of ECalipso's powerful tech units. He's kept the Patriarch alive, 2 Architects as well as an Uptecton, and look at that, dematrixing the Architect. If he can get steady healing onto it, he can actually keep it alive. Looks like back up here at 10 o'clock, there was just a couple of Zealots. Now we've got these anti-surface turrets that were put down, the Sentinels. They're going to help deal with any sort of errant run-bys. You're going to need to commit a little bit more heavy forces over to that location. Now, Azazel can't cast dematrix onto buildings, so unfortunately for EUD, he is going to end up starting to lose some of this action, but of course, we have Phalanxes and Madcaps and Autocrats coming on in, so the bio definitely going to be a big deal, right? The Madcap here, basically, it gets like a permanent stim to its attack rate as long as it attacks for a while without moving, and while moving, it loses that buff, but if the longer the fight goes on, the more that stacks up to eventually getting to a cap. And we also have the Apostles hitting the deck. So Apostles are like a defensive version of the Autocrat. When they channel their ability, they are actually going to be able to revive fallen Terran units. They can revive fallen enemy units as well, but they need to be positioned aggressively. And look at this. The Scribe coming in here, stolen by the Autocrat, now going to put down a Nexus. I feel like that's a little bit of a bait. I mean, it's still going to take damage because anything that you make for the worker is inherited by the results. So rather the status effect of it being a reclaimed thing is going to be inherited. And of course he ends up abandoning the position, so he should probably just cancel that. Although at this point in the game, he's got a decent amount of cash, so, you know, the fact that it wasn't canceled doesn't necessarily matter. We actually have a custom visual effect and audio read that happens when a Protoss or Terran structure is canceled, because you would traditionally you'd only notice that for Zerg because the worker would pop back up. But now we actually have a little quality of life change that indicates to the players when something was canceled versus when it wasn't. Meanwhile, of course, we have a pretty big set of forces coming out here for EUD using that macro machine. He's now erected a bunch of additional sentinels. Maybe you have to think about maybe air raids, you know, some kind of splash attack, some kind of artillery. Do have more analogs being made. It's mostly gateways. It's mostly gateways here, and he has a lot of zealots, so ECalipso can absolutely still try to take some fights, but I feel like his Optecton count needs to grow a little bit more. Now here comes a big blob of dead Terrans, and I don't think the Apostles were in the right position to try to reclaim them. I think they got nuked down anyway. The Zealot attack coming massively into picture. A couple Patriarchs going down. Those are very expensive losses. And it looks like he mostly kept his Optecton and Architect count in play. So at the very least, for that perspective, but he's making 11 Zealots at a time. Sure, you've got a lot of Phalanxes. There's 15 Phalanxes in the middle of the map. But I don't know about that one, man. This is still looking a little bit rough. Now, ECalipso hemorrhaging a couple of his units. He does have 3 o'clock operational. He's taking 4. Going up to that vaunted 5 base to try to match that of his opponent, who still has not taken 6 o'clock and has definitely not been able to stab up into this high ground here over at 11 o'clock. Feels like maybe that'll be the natural next destination. If you're wondering what's up with the treasury over here, you can actually use flying workers to harvest this gas. We haven't seen either player doing that. And the treasury, if it's a neutral town center, you can return to it. If it's an allied town center, you can return to it as well. It's pretty legit, so we'll have to see if that ends up coming into play later on when we get into the team game fray. All right, ECalipso coming down here trying to secure this 4th base. He's going to go ahead and add some Wardens, including an Engram. So that's like a souped-up AoE turret for the Protoss, so that'll protect against any air stacks. I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen any Tier 3 out of EUD. He has capped all of his geysers, it looks like, and now he's starting to set up a Ministry a little bit off-center. At 6 o'clock, he can obviously lift that over. Yeah, I think he's capped all of his geysers on all 5 bases. No, he hasn't capped it on his 3rd, so I guess that's the only spot. Gas is a little bit low for him. He steals a witness, only temporarily. Not exactly a major deal. And yeah, just a bunch of units moving over here. The Gorgons finding that 4 o'clock location. Anseal gonna be frontlining here, a little bit awkward, losing a lot of damage. Couple D-Matrixes on the frontline tanks. We got Harakans to peel. The Zealots not able to get too many good connections, and that was a big meaty hit on the 5 or 6 Zealots at once. Now the backline threatened. More Zealots trying to hit the front line. ECalipso, can you break all of these Phalanxes? The Harakans can't even get onto the front line. And I think ECalipso has a pretty massive force here. I don't really see how it could possibly be contained by EUD. He has no more frontline. He has no more spellcasters, and most of the Phalanx reinforcements weren't even deployed. I don't even think they're going to get him more than 1 or 2 shots off at this rate, and that is a big ball of ranged Protoss. You might not have any more frontline, but I think you can just descend upon the Terran from this perspective. What is the answer from EUD? He has no defenses over here, no sentinels. He basically just has like 5 Phalanxes and a couple of bio units. He's going to go ahead and harass with the Gorgons, but it's not going to be enough to do too much. They only deal single target, and the Engram will clean them up after the fact. I don't know. EUD might have overextended here. He's got 4K in the bank. He can almost afford that vaunted Tier 3, but it's going to be, you know, minutes before it comes online. ECalipso might be overextending here. A lot of his Phalanxes and Patriarchs are taking really bad fights, and the Apostles on the front line, they're not being focused down. They're being allowed to reclaim so many of this tech. You can see here, falling back though, I don't think it's just enough. I think it's a numbers game and ECalipso solving it. EUD not able to spend his money in the mid-game, and it looks like he might indeed be beaten back by the Protoss. Some great engagements coming out with the Zealots, really allowing ECalipso to overwhelm it. And I love the Hurakan idea, but it just was like, you know, if you had maybe some of the 4K that were in the bank on more Hurakans from there, maybe some Vultures for the mines, it has to be called GG. and exclamation point even. Massive game, according to ECalipso. And man, that was on a knife's edge for a while. I really loved that ECalipso stuck around in that game and tried to take as many expansions as he did. I think EUD maybe fell out of steam a little bit, ran out of steam at the end there, but wow, some really cool engagements in that one. If that doesn't get you hyped up for Cosmonarchy, I mean, I don't really know what will, man. Come on in and join us. You can see the links on the screen. Of course, if you want to support development, we even have a little coffee page for you in the bottom right and in the description. And we'll just see you guys for more games pretty soon. GG's, man. Daily videos all the time. Drop a sub if you're not already. Tell me what you think about the project, and we'll see you tomorrow.